It was an ironic twist of fate that on the 1 year anniversary of some of the worst flooding Vermont has seen in recent years, more rain fell in the central and northern parts of the state, bringing a painful reminder of the misery the rain of July 9th and 10th, 2023 caused. And that rainfall did impact several local communities, such as Manchester, Londonderry, and Weston. So we thought it'd be interesting to hear from some of the community leaders who have been on the front lines since July 2023 about what were the lessons learned and how those experiences have shaped their thinking on how to prepare for the next major flood. All signs point to the likelihood these flooding events may become more frequent and may require homes and buildings to be relocated further away from rivers. We first spoke with Scott Murphy, the town manager of Manchester. Manchester saw its worst flooding along Bourne Brook and the Richville Road Green Mountain Estates area, and it is here that the town's main resiliency focus has been.
Well, as you know, Manchester wasn't as affected as some of our neighboring communities and towns, but we did receive a significant impact in several key point areas, and one of those being down by the Green Mountain State roads and part of the Bourne Brook floodplain. And so at that time, after the flooding there, we spent up to $100,000 of town money to put emergency repairs in there on the brook, because it's trying to protect that Green Mountain Estates development. And then we received an additional $50,000, or approximately $50,000 from FEMA, for flooded roads and repairs to roads and things like that, culverts. Then we actually had a project ongoing through the NCRS program, which is the National Conservation Resources Group. And we actually had 4 projects ongoing at the time, but one of them included that Bourne Brook area. So late in the fall, we went in there through this project that took us 2 years to get to that point, and cleaned out a lot of the debris and opened up the flood chute on Bourne Brook, so that the water had some place to access during a flooding event. So all of those things have been done since that flood last year. And there's other areas around town we've done similar things. We had a couple projects through NRCS that we did on Butternut Lane, about $30,000 and $12,000, mostly debris removal and flood channel excavation. We did a replacement culvert, enlargement culvert in Bentley Hill, and then we did a flood chute above Butternut Lane, and then you mentioned that Rootville Road culvert that we used and replaced earlier in the year.
And how helpful was FEMA in helping navigate through all of this? Was their expertise helpful in helping the town kind of, recover in the short run, and then also maybe in the long run as well?
I think it depends on who you're dealing with at FEMA. We dealt with a lot of different people. For the most part, they're helpful, but really it's the funding that they provide which is the most help. Because usually a FEMA person will come and go, and then we get a new one and you start again down that road with them. But the funding is good, and without the funding we wouldn't be able to afford doing some of these projects.
I've heard from some towns that some of the paperwork was a little onerous and hard to figure, and some of the money was very slow in arriving. Was that your experience?
It's all federal funding, so whether it be NRCS or FEMA or what have you, federal funds take a long time. You just have to be patient. Yeah.
So I guess looking ahead, it's probably likely that we had Irene in 2011, and we had the flooding last year. So I guess every 12 years or so we can at least expect more of this sort of thing, I guess.
Well, it's 91 and 80% dew point today, so we know climate change is here to stay. So, but it takes a long time to upgrade your infrastructure, and generally the areas that are most need get washed out first, and so and that's the good thing because you can replace those. But then other areas that are just not quite in need, you can't get to those right away. So federal funding, state funding, all helpful. Without it, we wouldn't be able to do hardly anything.
Then we headed up the mountain to Londonderry, where we met up with Town Administrator Shane O'Keefe for his takeaways.
Sure. Well, I'll restrict myself to impacts on town infrastructure, not so much on private property owners. But we really it would have been very good to have had an off-the-shelf, guide to things we need to do and a step-by-step to meet FEMA regulations. Vermont Emergency Management did have a seminar within a couple of days, but by that time we'd already hired people on an emergency basis to get work done on day one. And there are certain requirements that you need to meet from a contractual standpoint to ensure FEMA reimbursement. And so we got lucky in that we had contracts put together really quickly with our contractors that are all compliant. So, based upon other experiences that we have and just an ability to know what needed to get done, we were able to ensure that sort of that paperwork got done. At the same time, for the boots on the ground folks at the highway department, luckily they've just got really great experience and proper equipment and able to get things done. And on top of that, we have a lot of contractors in this community in particular who were Johnny on the spot for us and really were able to deploy their forces and equipment really quickly, and we were able to recover relatively quickly compared to some other communities. Well, a lot of the culverts that were washed out or in some ways damaged were replaced with culverts of a larger size, and we were able to do that with the FEMA funding. So if we had a 15-inch culvert, we were able to upgrade it to an 18-inch, that sort of thing. So we have done a lot of that. Also, over the years, through the what's called the Grants and Aid program, each year we get between $17,000 and $22,000 to work on roadside ditch work, where we put in certain kinds of gravel and stone in order to deal with stormwater runoff and things of that nature. So we've been armoring some of our facilities over the years, but we have done some of that work, but primarily it's been upgrading culverts. And we've been, working with FEMA, working with Vermont Emergency Management on trying to upgrade some, say, 6-foot culverts to 18-foot culverts, box culverts, because we have hydrology studies that indicate that that's the size we need. So one example is Spring Hill Road, where we were able to get some funding over the years to address that flooding problem at a culvert. And see, that's going to be an $800,000 culvert when it's all said and done, because it's really, really large, and costs are higher than they used to be. But little by little, we're trying to improve our infrastructure and make it more resilient. Some of the earlier staff from FEMA was woefully unprepared to help the town, and in fact just confused things for us. Luckily, and it wasn't just Londonderry, it was other towns as well, and word got passed up the chain, and eventually they cleaned house and removed a lot of the FEMA representatives. New people came in, and they were particularly helpful to us with their problem-solving mindset. That they've done a great job for us, and one of the things we also did is we brought on a flood hazard administrator. In other words, someone to deal with our issues of paperwork and meeting FEMA guidelines and requirements. An individual who's a former FEMA employee, also a former town administrator in Vermont, and flood hazard administrator in another community, who was particularly helpful. And we were, up to now, we've been able to recoup $487,000 of money that's spent, which is roughly half of what we spent I think we're well ahead of other communities. I've heard of one town that got it worse than we did, and they haven't received a penny. So we've been really lucky on that front.
Shortly before both of these conversations, a meeting was held in Londonderry with Senator Peter Welch and Congresswoman Becca Balint, which focused on the same points, building resiliency for future floods, but also zoomed in on how well FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, helped local communities. It's a bit of a mixed picture, and FEMA is now being called upon for financial support much more often. The road ahead remains to be defined. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.